Hello and welcome to the Tipsy Theory podcast. My name is Adrian.
And I'm Allysha.
And today we are coming at you with yet another debate date.
This debate date will be focused on mandatory voting throughout North America and if it should or should not be compulsory.
So super exciting, especially since we have a federal election coming up in October, is it?
Yes, at the end of October we have the federal election, and yeah, do you want to talk about that?
So we have we actually have 5 federal parties. Only one of 2 will actually win, most likely. The 2 big players in this are the federal conservatives and the federal liberals, both having their own little controversies that may hinder and split votes, and people will be splitting hairs between which one they should vote for. Mainly because the federal liberals have been embroiled in controversy and hypocrisy in the last 6 months with several scandals and Justin Trudeau really kind of just rubbing a few Canadians the wrong way. And the federal conservatives are not blameless either. They have a thorn in their side by the name of Doug Ford, who is representative of the conservative brand within Ontario. But since Ontario is like a third of the entire conservative voting base, that can seriously hinder Andrew Scheer, the federal conservative leader's chances of winning because of that. So we will talk about not necessarily their prospects of voting, but whether if we should make voting compulsory to actually go out and vote for any of the actual 5 parties that will be running: the Conservatives, the Liberals, the NDP, the New Democratic Party, the Green Party, and the newest party in Canada, the People's Party of Canada, is it?
Yeah. And I think what's a really good time to bring this up now is because we're kind of in this, at least in Canada, we're in this part right now where a lot of people don't want to vote for the Liberals because of the scandal. And then a lot of people don't want to vote for the Conservatives either because of Doug Ford. A lot of people right now are being like, well, maybe I just won't vote because there's no point in voting because I don't want either parties to lead.
So populism, if you're not familiar with the terminology, populism, it's when a single person, a single entity, a single personality is representative or becomes representative of an entire political view. So in America, that would be republicanism being represented by none other than Donald Trump. We have populism here in Ontario now.
Absolutely.
Doug Ford is representative of the conservative brand in Ontario.
And what's really amazing, though, at this point is Doug Ford right now, at least in my opinion, is representative of the entire Conservative Party nationwide, regardless of whether or not he has like a foothold in the rest of the country.
And many people would absolutely agree with you. And many people see Doug Ford as the representative brand of conservatism across the country, even though he's only a premier.
Yeah. Andrew Scheer is the one at the forefront, but that doesn't matter to a lot of voters this election.
Yeah, so super interesting. So a lot of, as you said, many people are considering just leaving or staying out of it. But is that a good idea? Should we enforce people to go out and vote even if they don't want to? That is something that we will be discussing today, and I'm super excited. So let's just jump on into it.
Well, but first...
Right. We have...
You're getting so excited for it.
I'm
You're
so excited.
Else.
I just want to jump in. Before we get into it, let's just cover our basis. This is a podcast that is called Tipsy Theory, which means that there is a drink involved in all of our discussions. What is our drink today?
One of my absolute favorites that I get at every single bar that it's on the menu, the Moscow Mule.
A link to that will be available on the website if you're listening to this on tipsytheory.com. If you're not listening to this on tipsytheory.com, head over onto the website and you can check out our drinks column, and there you will find the recipe on how to make your very own Moscow Mule.
We also post everything on Instagram and Facebook, so you can find all the recipes there as well.
Brilliant. And today's sponsor is Groundhog Marketing Automation for WordPress. If you have a business already, you're looking to grow your business, or you want to start a business, then marketing needs to be an essential portion of your plan. Without marketing, it is very hard to grow your business. Groundhog makes it easier for you to start building your list, send email, send text messages to your customers in order to make them come back more, to increase customer retention, and to build your brand. If you would like more information on how Groundhog can help you grow your business, please go over to groundhog.io. That's Groundhog spelled with 2 G's. and you can download their free tool and install it on your website in order to start growing your business today. So I'm going to start us off with our first argument. I should mention that most of these arguments are not my own. I did Google. I did do a lot of Googling, and I found some opinions and Twitter posts and a lot of interesting viewpoints on this matter. So I should mention that I wish I was original and smart as some of these people that I'm about to quote, but unfortunately I'm not. But I will read them to you anyway. So my first argument for why we should not have mandatory voting in North America is, in at least it depends on perception, but a lot of us see voting as a right.
Ooh, interesting point.
Okay, so a lot of us see voting as a right. As free citizens who live in a democracy meaning, you know, everybody has freedom of expression, freedom of belief, freedom of speech, that voting is one of those freedoms and is a right. And as much as we have the right to vote, we also have the civil right to not vote.
I like how you use the word civil, because isn't voting a civil responsibility?
Well, that's, you know, again, it depends on perception. So if voting is classified as a right, not a responsibility. Here. It is in other countries, but according to our Constitution, a bunch of other stuff and laws and whatnot that we have, it is technically a right and not a civil duty. So therefore, if it is a right, we just as equally have the right to not do something. And therefore, according to our current laws and legislations, it would not essentially be possible in order to vote unless they changed that to voting being a civil duty rather than a right.
So here's the thing. Obviously, I'm arguing for the point of that's non-existent in our country right now. But it's important to note that you say it should be a right. Okay? But it is classified as one of the civil things. I'm not going to say duty because it's not in Canada. But it's classified as one of the things that you do for your country. And there are a lot of other things that we do for our country that are mandatory, like jury duty and taxes. And the fact that voting doesn't fall underneath with all of these other things and is the odd one out is a very strange thing to me.
Well, it may seem that way to you. I like it as a right rather than as a civil duty for another reason, which I'll get into in a moment. But you have another point.
Well, I'm going to ask you why. Because you would vote anyways.
Yes, I would vote. While I do not believe voting should be compulsory, I do believe everybody has a duty and responsibility to become informed and should go. But if they are not informed, which is where I'm about to go next, which is my second argument.
You're jumping ahead here. I'm not done mine.
You're not done your argument? Would you like me to let you finish first?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So why it should not be compulsory, but why I believe that everyone has the duty to become informed and vote is because if we made voting compulsory and actually enforced it, then that means that we would be including the uninformed electorate in the overall voting base, which means that could absolutely skew election results, not necessarily actually vote or actually going towards or skew towards the general public opinion.
I personally disagree with this fact for the main point that if it was mandatory to vote, more people would be politically informed. Right now, a lot of people aren't politically informed because they're lazy and know that they can just skip out on it. If you're not going to go vote, what's the point of looking into it? If you have to go vote, it will encourage a bigger audience to actually be aware of the political debates because they know that their voice matters. It's also important to note, which you cut off from my last point, is that this is already a thing in 26 different countries. 26 different countries already have mandatory voting, and it works wonders. Their voting rates are nearly perfect. Obviously, people still miss voting and they get fined for it. But an Australian study by BBC states that a lot of people now agree, I think it's like 60, let me get the number right. 67% of Australians agree that they are politically informed for the sole purpose that they are forced to vote.
Interesting. So your argument that you're making is that by making voting compulsory, it would compel more people to become informed about
Absolutely,
the voting process, so
because
they need to be involved.
why would you look into politics if you're not going to vote? You know, the majority of people here who don't vote don't know what's happening politically for the most part. They're like, I'm not going to vote. I'm not registered. Like, I'm not going to go make it out. So, like, I don't really care what Andrew Scheer says. You know, they're not going to look into it. They're not going to care.
That, that is an okay argument, except for it is an okay argument, except for the point that while the voter may still be informed, they may still have no particular preference over for any particular party. So while they may be informed, that may not necessarily inform their decision for what may benefit them, and then they would still choose any random leader because they have no particular preference, even though they are informed, again, still skewing election results.
Okay, but the thing is you're always going to have a person who votes uninformedly. You know what I mean? Like, the thing happens now in Canada. How many people do you think voted for Justin Trudeau last year because he was hot, not because of his political campaign?
Exactly my point.
Like, it happens whether it's mandatory or not.
Exactly my point. So we should keep it, but by making it mandatory, we would probably see a larger population of that. At least that is that would be my prediction, or at least that's a lot of other people's prediction.
It's a prediction, but the thing is, 26 countries already have this, and they've seen great results from it. No studies
in terms of voter turnout.
Yes, but they've done research. I think the Swiss company did research back in 2004, and they stated that there is no proof that the voting has been swayed either way.
Either way, meaning, can you qualify that?
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that they're saying it shows no way. Like, they didn't make voting mandatory, and then they saw like, oh, so many people are voting for Democrat or so many people are voting for Republican. The voting stayed the same, which means, like, people, even if you argue that they're not voting concisely, it's not overpowering the actual vote.
Interesting. What study was this?
The Swiss canton back in 2004.
Oh, I'm looking at that right now, and I will corroborate your findings, or their findings rather. Okay. Well, I think that brings that argument. So to recap that quick back and forth, if voting is a right, my argument being if voting is a right, then it is also a right to not vote. While Allysha, you're making the point that if we made it a civil duty, that would compel more people to actually become informed.
Absolutely. And
I think that's putting a lot of faith into the electorate. I guess we'll just if it does happen, we'll have to wait and see. But there's not really any way to well,
you can look at
quantify that, is there?
I mean, other people do it. There's studies from other countries.
Well, I mean, there's no way to quantify how many uninformed people there would be as a result.
No, but people already vote uninformally.
This is true. That is not incorrect.
Plus, not to mention, at the moment, only 1 in 4 Canadians under the age of 25 currently vote. If voting became mandatory, it would not only make the age gap disappear, but it would also get rid of the whole like social inequality that's already present in voting. Because right now with Canadians that are voting, it's all older people and more rich people. Studies show that a majority of people who live in impoverished parts of Canada do not vote. So right now, Canada, sure, you can say they're not like biased or unmoved, but at the moment, the people who are choosing our electorals are older rich people, statistically. So making it mandatory will ruin that, and everybody will have a say.
Interesting. Is that your second point?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I have a rebuttal to that. So, if we were to make voting mandatory, that would be essentially applied across all citizens across the board.
Mm-hmm.
However, we do live in a sparsely populated country with large amounts of land to cross and varying degrees of impoverished or wealthy communities across the board. If we were to make voting mandatory, then the penalties of enforcement will also have to be enforced across the board against all citizens. And while we have that giant, we have a very large gap between communities depending on region. So those disparate, or that penalty could disparage different communities in different ways depending on financial status or whatever that penalty may be. So in Australia, it is a financial penalty. It's a small financial penalty of $20 is what they enforce.
Yes.
However, in Canada, I imagine that would be a little bit larger than that. But having
You are pulling that out of your ass, though, sir. You have no idea how much it would be.
well, there's different ways of enforcing it. $20 for many people, though, could be a little bit of a deterrent for. How am I going to put this? Not necessarily a deterrent. If someone is unable to make it to a voting stand and they still get that $20 fine, then paying it, especially if you're in some northern regions of Canada, could be a little bit more difficult than, for example, if you're in a major city like Toronto and your voting center's down the block. So put some communities out in order to actually make it to a voting place.
You don't need to make it to a voting place.
Why not?
This election, Canadian can vote online.
Well, shit.
So your argument's completely invalid. Yes, in the past, that is true, but this year they are doing online voting.
Okay, well then there you have it.
So at that point, if you don't vote, there's polling stations everywhere. They make it accessible to all Canadians. 2, you can vote online. So if you miss both of those opportunities, that's on you at that point, not on the government.
Fair enough. Allysha coming in clutch with the online polling.
Yeah, it's new. It came out last week. I can Google it quickly if you want to keep talking.
So in Canada, I guess we now have online polling. So location, or depending on access to the internet, I suppose would also be an issue if you didn't have any internet access. Although internet
Who doesn't have internet access? You are pulling at straws
Iroquois
here.
Falls. Okay, I agree. That's a little bit of a weaker argument on my part. I will acknowledge that. So I'm gonna give points Allysha for that rebuttal. I'm gonna bring up my third argument then.
I've just clarified you can vote online this year.
We can vote online.
Yeah, just double checking before
Crazy.
I completely crushed you.
Third argument, in a democracy, we have this nice thing that many of us utilize on a very regular basis, especially in our especially in our country to the south, the United States. It's called freedom of speech. Now, freedom of speech is very versatile in what you can actually claim is speech. Now, by making voting mandatory, some argue that this would actually be a form of compelled speech by making people speak in a way that they would not necessarily otherwise do. As freedom of speech, we've seen exemplified in the movement to not vote as a protest vote.
I was just hoping you wouldn't bring up this point, to be honest. Because
people protest by not
honestly,
voting all the time, which is freedom of speech. So if we compelled people to vote and then fined them or penalize that person for expressing that freedom of speech, is that justified?
Well, if it's considered a civic duty, then yes, because you can have freedom of speech all you want, but you still have to pay your taxes. You still have to go to jury duty unless there's like extreme circumstances that you can't go to jury duty. But like there's still things like living in your country, you should be mandatory to vote. Because freedom of speech, you can be like, I'm not going to vote because both of these people are stupid. But then you're just going to bitch about it for like the next 4 years, even though you didn't vote. Like you not voting isn't going to do anything. It's just going to make the situation worse because you backing down from voting is going to make all of the people who do vote, which are statistically in Canada, white rich men, to choose who leads. And then you're going to be stuck there in the backseat because you chose to protest, which did absolutely nothing because the leader that you didn't want to win still won.
Whether or not you think that's morally justified is certainly up for debate. But the question becomes, is it their right to do so?
I don't think so.
She doesn't think so.
To be honest, though, the thing about penalties is, especially in Australia right now, it is a very low penalty. So you can still not vote. But putting the fine on it will encourage more people to be politically informed and will encourage more people to vote.
So I have a follow-up to that point, however. So making citizens exercise or compelling citizens to exercise their right to vote may actually infringe on the rights of certain minority groups. There are several religious sectors that see voting as or differently than the rest of if you're agnostic, for example. I will take into account Jehovah's Witnesses. While they, knocking on their door may not be the perfect event to happen on your Sunday afternoon, they see voting as a personal decision, and I'm quoting this directly from an article. Jehovah's Witnesses view voting as a personal decision to be made based on each one's conscious and understanding of their responsibility to God and the government. Many witnesses do not vote, taking care to preserve the neutrality and compromise of their faith. So they, as a society, wish to remain neutral in areas of government or in political views of government, and would rather abstain from voting as their real, I guess their higher calling is the book rather than the government.
No, exactly. And I totally agree with that, especially same with how, like a lot of people don't do other things for religiously, like get vaccines, like they can refuse medicine. There's a lot of things, which is why in the 26 countries where voting is mandatory, you can actually opt out for your religious duty. So you can do that. And if you're religious and you have a religious against it, you can opt out of religious duty. But that's not an excuse for everybody who's too lazy to vote.
It's a good rebuttal. Point Allysha.
Because the thing is with a country so multicultural as Canada, you have to take in consideration that it should be mandatory to vote because yes, it is your duty for your country. But if there's something, for example, your religious duty where you the Canadian government isn't going to ask you to change your religion. I mean, they have in the past for some things, but we're not going to bring those up. But they would probably most likely adopt the thing that Australia does, where you can opt out for your religious duty, which you can do with a lot of other things in Canada as well. So, the whole point about being mandatory is that it makes people vote who are just too lazy to be politically informed. And to make the younger generation vote, because right now the younger generation is who really should be voting because it's our future. Yet only 1 in 4 Canadians under the age of 25 vote. So their future is being held into the hands of the older generation, which is stupid because they're the ones where the future matters. So if it was mandatory for them to vote, they would be more politically informed and they would vote for their future.
And we'd have a socialist state.
Not necessarily. You don't fully know that, but maybe.
The NDP would definitely be in power. Free dental care.
Just for the elderly, though.
It wasn't free dental care for it was everybody.
Oh, wasn't everybody?
I'm pretty sure it was across the board. Crazy. We all got free drugs though under 25.
Yeah.
Free pharmacare.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, you next. I feel like I'm losing.
I feel like you're losing too, but the only reason why is because I have so much proof that it works.
There is again that a lot of this study is subjective. Again, it's not a total 100% for vote in Australia either. It is less than 70. So there is a good over 1/3.
There are some people who don't vote.
Yeah.
But I think one of the big differences is just kind of going off my notes is one of the big differences here is that if we're talking about North America as a whole, because a lot of the times, what America does, Canada does, and what Canada does, America does. If North America as a whole was to adopt mandatory voting, Americans aren't ready for that. The thing is Americans are just so this is my right. Everything is their right, guns are their right. Voting is their right. But the thing that they don't realize is them not voting actually makes it worse because then Donald Trump gets elected. So
I want to bring up the fact I have another argument.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
So compulsory voting is compulsory in the country of Brazil. Mm-hmm. It is the largest country with the largest population where compulsory voting is actually enforced in the presidential election.
Yes.
In Brazil,
mm-hmm.
compulsory voting is increasingly, and I'm quoting this, is increasingly resented by citizens. Of some 30 million voters, 21% of registered voters did not vote, despite the fact that Brazil has some of the most severe penalties against non-voters. So they believe that their compulsory voting is actually, or the fact that compulsory voting or that voting is compulsory makes the idea of voting less attractive because everybody hates, as you keep saying, everybody has to pay taxes. But what is the number one thing that people hate doing?
This doesn't mean that they don't pay their taxes.
No, but they resent the idea, or they resent having to pay their taxes, and they do so begrudgingly. If we force people to go to the polls begrudgingly because they have to, because otherwise we're essentially threatening them with a penalty, would that essentially inform? Because we have people who end up on the ballot as like joke candidates or people that you never heard of. Would they go to the polls and would they essentially take action against the incumbent government because they resent the idea of being forced to do something that they don't necessarily want to do? Right now, people go to the polls because they want to, because they believe that they have a duty and responsibility to effect change in our country. But if we force people to do that and they feel as though that if they don't, they will be penalized, like your taxes, for example, which most people in this country do rather begrudgingly, would they then take action on something that they can essentially change, but for the worse, and take a negative action rather than having what you argued earlier, becoming informed and making a informed decision?
I personally don't think so. Because if you think about it now, the people that this mandatory vote will be targeting is younger audience. And
who voted for Trudeau because he was what?
1 in 4 Canadians. But I just think if that was
who's pretty, that was the answer.
If that was to happen, it would have happened by now. Like if Brazil resented mandatory voting so much and they just decided not to go to the polls, how is that really affecting it? Because they're already not going to the polls anyways. At least, what you said, 20% of Brazilians didn't go to the polls? 21. So at least that still brings the voting percentage up to 79. Right now we're at what, 58, I think it was, and that's the lowest that Canadians have had.
I think that's actually one of the highest turnouts that Canadians have ever had.
I have it here.
Canada has a historically low voter turnout, especially for federal elections.
Yeah, no. In 2008, one of the lowest turnouts was 58%. So at least that will still bring our voting up by 20%. And we can think that a lot of people who will be voting will be politically informed. The people who are just hating the idea that it's their right and choose not to vote, that's on them. But there will be an increase in voting, and it will stop the gender gap, and it will also stop the whole, like, you know, especially since a lot of people in poverty countries, areas in the country don't vote either. It will start to bring Canada together instead of keeping the voting where it is right now at a very, like, non-multicultural, aged vote. The point of voting is that Canada votes as a whole. Right now, the Canadian vote is biased because of the people who do not vote, which are younger generations, which are poor generations, poor families, not generations. So making it mandatory, while, you know, some people still make rebuttal by not voting, will definitely help increase and close those gaps.
On the same token, and this is a weaker argument, but I will bring it up anyway, just as a thought experiment. On the same token, minority groups who have generally been well represented in elections would be drowned out by larger groups of, let's say, just put it as the filler population. So it's always the people who are unhappy are always the loudest, and in elections, minority groups who are unhappy, of course, always go to the polls. But those who are essentially, you know, happy and they don't go and vote because, you know, status quo is fine with them, compelled to vote, may vote, you know, something in favor that wouldn't necessarily be represented by a minority group looking for change. So
but the minority group wouldn't win anyways because they were the minority.
Well, the thing is, minority groups have better representation with less voter turnout.
How? Oh, so you mean like if nobody voted?
So let's say, if, you know, if just by doing
so
the math.
What you're saying is that the minority group who's voting out of hatred will have a chance of winning if nobody else votes.
Well, so if
is that
you
really
were,
how you want the votes to work?
No, not really. It was more of a thought experiment than an actual argument, which I prefaced before going down this road. But if you were to do the math, for example, let's say 10 people in a group of 100 wanted to effect change, right? And they were voting with a larger group, let's say 20 people, right? But the rest of the 60 people were happy with status quo in the incumbent government. But they wouldn't have voted otherwise because they wouldn't have been compelled to because they're happy with
So
status
then,
quo.
therefore, the minority group would have won.
Would have lost if they were all compelled to vote. However, the minority group looking
Yes.
to affect change, if the voting was non-compulsory, they would have been able to affect that change in order to better suit their situation.
So your argument, just to clarify, is that
A poor one.
don't worry, I'm ready. Is that if we left voting as a choice, it would allow minority groups to win,
It would allow minority groups to be better represented
which
in
is
the vote.
a good thing to you.
Which is in the electorate. Well, it depends
The
on your
whole
perception.
point of voting is to pick the person that the country wants the most together. So therefore, the minority winning because nobody's voting shows the exact problem of why it should be mandatory.
It was more of a thought experiment. All right, so you know what? I'm losing. I'm just losing.
It's because it's statistically proven that mandatory voting is better for our country. It just is. Like, we have shitty turnout votes, and if we were to make it mandatory, guaranteed.
Doug Ford still would have won.
Yes, but
Did I push a nerve there?
the thing is, Doug Ford would have won, but if voting was mandatory, Andrew Scheer wouldn't make it through in the elections.
We'll see. I don't know. Only time will tell, and it's not going to be a long wait because it's only in October.
We should come back and revisit this in October.
We will come back and revisit this after we get the voter turnout numbers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think it's pretty definitive at this point.
That I kicked
at least
your ass.
between us two. I'm not very bright though, and I'm just going to chalk it down to that. But I think Allysha has made some pretty compelling arguments as to why mandatory voting would be beneficial in this country. We do, in fact, have historically low voter turnouts on all levels of government, both federal, provincial, and local.
Yeah.
Especially local, which has the lowest turnout out of
Oh,
any
yeah. The
political
numbers that
level.
I was saying were federal turnouts.
Yeah.
So
It sounds at least like all in all, having mandatory compulsory voting would be beneficial. But of course, that is left up to you, the listener. And you can make up your own mind depending on the arguments that we shared here, as well as other arguments that exist on the internet where we sourced all of ours. So
no, some of mine were my own thoughts.
Were they?
Yeah.
Brilliant. None of mine were original. I wish I was more original.
It's because I'm, passionate about politics, apparently.
All right, we're going to wrap this episode up. I
Yeah.
hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you got a little bit of value out of it. Please become an informed voter and participate, no matter what your political stripe, in the upcoming election.
No matter what I said in my argument, you should really only vote if you're informed.
Yes.
You should vote, but you should definitely become informed first.
There are many ways to become informed. Listen to the radio.
Listen to unbiased radio
Listen to
stations.
unbiased radio, unlike myself.
Do your own research. Don't just get all of your research from a conservative party and then go vote conservative.
Don't believe every headline you see on Facebook.
Absolutely not.
Please go do your own research and don't just take other people's word for it. Don't just take our words for it.
No.
Become an informed voter and participate and exercise what is your right to vote in this country.
Know what else is your right?
What else is your right?
The fact that you can subscribe to us.
Yes, please subscribe. You can subscribe to us on iTunes, on Spotify, on Android Audio, and all of those.
You
good
can
places.
also follow us on Facebook and Instagram.
Follow us at Tipsy Theory Podcast
on Facebook,
both
and-
Facebook and Instagram.
No, Instagram's just at Tipsy Theory.
Well, there you've heard it.
And
here
you can
first,
follow
folks.
us on Twitter at Tipsy Theory, but because we're millennials, our Twitter isn't the most up to date.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to our sponsor, Groundhog Marketing Automation for WordPress. Again, if you have a business or you're looking to start a business, grow your business, then you need marketing as part of your overall business plan. Being able to communicate with your customers and subscribers is all important in this day and age, as everybody is arguing or everybody's competing for your attention. In order to be able to compete in that, you need to be emailing your customers, you need to be texting your customers, communicating with them on social media, and Groundhog provides you the perfect set of tools to be able to do that. All you need to do is install their plugin on your WordPress website and be able to immediately start taking names and kicking ass. So you can go to groundhog.io That is Groundhog spelt with 2 G's at the end, HOGG.io, to download that plugin for absolutely free right now. And thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Debate Date on Tipsy Theory. My name's been Adrian.
And I'm Allysha, and cue the outro music.